Well, hi everyone, welcome to Expanding the Engineering Experience. So this is an event brought to you by a bunch of EWB university chapters such as UQ, QUT, UNSW, Macquarie, University of Sydney, UTS, and UTSF. So we have a pretty jam-packed night for you today, so let's get started. So the way the night's going to run, we're going to have a few talks from a few professionals. So we have Mr. Shri Satyan from South Health, and he's going to give us a speech first. And then after that, we'll hear from Nick Williams, who has his own startup called Sempo. After that, Nick will give us a workshop briefing. So we're going to do a workshop on human-centered design. So we'll break you up into breakout rooms after Nick gives off that briefing, and then we're going to have a bit of competition. Nick will explain more later, but get keen for that. And then after that, we're going to hear from Jaideep Bansal from Global Himalayan Expedition. So after that, we also have a Q&A session, and we'll also have two young professionals from industry available here with us today. So we've got Danica Smith and Riley DeJong here. So we're going to hear from all of them today, and yeah, then you'll have a chance to ask questions later on at the Q&A. So I guess let's get started.
Hi everyone, good evening everybody from Australia. This is Srini. I head product development for South Health. I'm based in India. We are a health technology startup that's based out of Mumbai, and we've been sort of running South Health for more than 2 years now. So for those of you who don't really know what South Health is about, we are a health information dissemination platform, both as a mobile app as well as a website since recently, for Indian people, mostly Indian parents, Hindi-speaking Indian parents from low and middle income communities, low and middle income groups in urban and semi-urban settlements in India. We have been around mostly Mumbai, Delhi, some of the northern Indian states, and also higher, I would say higher than 3 million people, urban conglomerations in India. There's many of them. South Health has had a longish journey from the start, and I'd like to actually show you how we combine the use of user-centric design and also technology in the right sense to reach out to people and provide them with content. Given that behavior change using technology was our primary aim. Before I start off, I'd like to also mention that we've got our co-founder Aditi Hazraganju, who's on this call. She is not only our co-founder, but she also heads the entire content team, the team that produces the content that goes on the South Health app. She lays down the strategy for reaching out to millions of Indian people, as well as she also heads any sort of content development for any of our other behavioral change programs in India and across the world. Yeah. So when we thought of launching South Health, the primary aim was to reach out to people based on a hypothesis, based on an experiment back in 2018, where we had initially worked out if it is possible, by just basic user research, if it is possible to reach out to lower and middle income Indians with some amount of smartphone affinity, so that by the use of a mobile app or some sort of a digital interface, we could provide them with extremely rich content. And by rich content, we meant like animations or interactive games or interactive tutorials that would basically give them the information that they're looking for in a format that they would like to. What we did was in 2018, when we launched South Health, we conducted a user research and a deep dive background study of the populations that we want to work with for about 6 weeks. And this was primarily in the cities of Mumbai and Delhi, which have some of the highest slum clusters, but also some of the highest health and malnutrition figures, I would say. Mumbai has about 2 slums that would probably have a population of 1.5 million people each. and they probably have some of the worst health statistics when it comes to malnutrition, when it comes to stunted growth, and when it comes to childhood diseases. So we started off with an on-the-ground survey, a detailed qualitative and quantitative survey in these two communities. And in parallel, we had some research data, preliminary research data from 2016 and 15 from both cities, from Delhi and Mumbai, that supported that these two slum clusters were ideal to look at. What we were trying to look at is what are the kinds of technological interventions that are on the ground when it comes to health information, when it comes to parenting, when it comes to nutrition. What we found really shocking was that despite the prevalence of mobile phones, so back in 2017, 18, there was a smartphone penetration of up to 60% in these areas. When I mean 60%, it also means that a majority of the smartphones were owned by the male members of the family. And typically these are large families with about 3 to 4 children. There's about 7 to 8 people sharing 40 square meter and 40 square meter place. And the 40 square meter place would be divided into 2 levels. So technically there's 20 square meters below and 20 square meters above. And there's 8 people living in that. So you can imagine a really congested atmosphere of people, mostly working class, but also with a huge family and large number of children. Consequently, if there's a smartphone, or if there are 2 smartphones that are available in the family, they're probably recycled phones that are not just secondhand, but third or fourth hand recycled. Surprisingly, you might even find like an iPhone in some of these families, but that's like literally fourth hand. But the prevalence of these smartphones also showed us that people in these communities were aspirational. People were looking forward to getting to a better life through mobile applications. India's mobile app market has almost tripled in the last 5 years, with the presence of apps that go all the way from banking to fintech, to healthcare, to food delivery, to e-commerce, to also general information and social media apps. So in terms of how the market has spread, you might find a lot of studies that indicate that there is a huge penetration of vernacular or local regional languages. About 60% of India tends to read content online using a regional language or a combination of English and a regional language. By regional language, we're referring to here about 27, 28 different regional languages. So in a country of high diversity, a smartphone really makes it easy for people to get access to information. What we were thinking of putting on a mobile app, since smartphones seem to be so penetrative in these segments, is information on health, on the right amount of nutrition due to the high prevalence of malnutrition and stunted growth, and also parenting tips. Because most people had a combination of belief systems, a combination of hearsay methods of parenting and nourishment for their children, things that they'd heard from their mother-in-laws, their uncles, their aunts, their neighbors, but not really handed down in the textbook sense through schooling. A lot of people in Mumbai are also outsiders, in the sense they're migrants, whether they're skilled or unskilled laborers. 60% of Mumbai's population does not come from Mumbai, but has moved to Mumbai because of work, because of employment and aspirational lifestyles. And that's a very, very high mark also amongst the low-income communities in Mumbai. So probably around 90% of them are not from Mumbai. They've moved from a remote village or from a semi-rural area, somewhere else, mostly from farming backgrounds, and they wanted to make a big life in Mumbai. What they're exposed to because of the lack of probably good reading skills is the access to video, the access to audio visual content. So our initial findings actually gave us the thought that if we were to put any sort of video-led interactive communication, video-led interactive information in a gamified format, we're more likely to reach these people. Gamification also meant that there would need to be some amount of incentives. Incentives would be the right social paths, would be the nudges for people to stay on, and it would also give them some sense of community leadership, in the sense, oh, there's 50 other people in my neighborhood. I've got so many points. There's so many other people who are competing with me. I might want to stay on this app and get more information. So what we did was we had a curated list of content pieces. We had a curated list of topics, such as health, such as nutrition, such as dental health. Recently, we've also added information on COVID-19, on parenting, on also behavioral changes of children across age groups. And in our initial experiment, since we found that people were also high on content consumption, and there was never before any other experiment like this in the market, we started also playing around with adding nutritional supplements, which they could exchange for points earned on the app. So basically they could get a pack of eggs, or they could get a pack of lentils or yogurt or chickpeas or some sort of nutritional foodstuffs that are basically not something that they would buy outside in a market or they would get access to otherwise, but it's regularly found in their kitchens. It's regularly found on their plate. But these are things that would additionally add, protein, would add energy, would add the right amount of micro and macronutrients to their children's plates. So as a key mechanism to promote nutrition, we had also thought about converting these incentive points into redeemable objects through the app. So what we built was a connected health ecosystem. So by a connected health ecosystem, what I mean is we managed to connect a user app, and the app that you see on the left with the white screen. We managed to connect this with a range of not only content information, but also rewards, and the rewards journey basically leading into a consumable object. So it could lead to something that they could use for their lives, use for enriching their children's plates. What we did was also bring up a partner application. So just like Uber has got a Uber partner app for the drivers, we also brought up a partner application that would enable us to not only enroll people, but also we had this model in 2018 and 19 of partnering with local Kirana stores. And Kirana stores are local small department stores, mostly run by young entrepreneurs or by local entrepreneurs in these slums. The people from these slum colonies who live there, who know everybody, who have access to a wealth of information about who had a child, whose children have dental issues, who does not have enough finances to give their children sufficient food. They have access to a lot of local information and the gossip around town. So these are not only stores where people would go because they trusted what was sold in the stores, but these are also stores where a lot of local information would be exchanged. So these were our focal points of convergence where people could get access to the South Health app. So we use these Kirana stores. We spoke to quite many of these Kirana stores. I think at the high point, we had about 20 different Kirana stores who were working with us. They were acting as partners for South Health, and they were helping us onboard people onto the app. Apart from these people, we had a bunch of health workers, local health workers in these slum communities who would go around door to door and help acquire mothers and fathers onto the app. Not only just acquire them, but also have conversations with them in terms of what this app would help their children and what behavior change actually meant, in the higher sense of how a healthy eating habit or healthy nutrition in the first 7 years of a child's life can save the child's later years. So we also undertook quite some amount of training for these agents or for these health workers, as well as for the Kirana stores. We also did community workshops, because what we found out is just launching mobile apps on an Android phone in a slum community with, let's say, limited connectivity, you can assume that people were willing to get on this app and acquire those incentives and redeem points. So they would actually go to any extent, in the sense that they would share each other's mobile networks for a mobile hotspot, or if somebody had a 1 Mbps wireless internet line, and there are people in these slums who get basically a DTH connection with a 1 Mbps internet line, they would basically share each other's connections in order to just play a few minutes on the app per day, watch some videos, answer some quizzes, and get some points. So people were actually extremely interactive. What we found is that though they were willing to cross the barrier of learning to use a smartphone, learning to use the app in order to gain more information, in order to gain more points, there was also the barrier amongst women predominantly, since they did not always have access to a smartphone, to use an app that they were never exposed to before. So we had to supplement this over a period of time with workshops. And these workshops were technically mobile literacy workshops. So we were, used to organize workshops every week in the slum communities in Mumbai and in Delhi, with an average of about 20 to 25 participants, mostly women. Sometimes women would bring their children along with them since it was during the daytime, and they would learn basically to use a smartphone. So partly what we are doing and we were achieving is increasing the mobile literacy of these populations, but also empowering these women to learn more and make decisions for their own children and for their families. What we could do is get all of this data from Firebase, get all of the data from Google Analytics, and plug it on to a Google Data Studio dashboard. So we created a dashboard we've got a live dashboard even now from the last couple of years. It's pretty much real time. You can check data from our app in terms of app consumption, in terms of user behaviors, in terms of which are the most watched areas of content, as well as which type of content gets more interaction than the others. For example, our studies in the last 2 years found out, purely on the basis of the consumption data, that people were more interested in answering quizzes than watching our 60 to 90 second short animated videos. So most of our videos are animated videos. There are a few videos that are interviews with doctors that are basically expert advice videos on parenting, on dental health, for example, or on mental health. But majority of the content consumption went towards quizzes. This is also because that the quiz feature in our app is highly interactive. I mean, there's a complete points journey where you can answer literally like a stack of cards. You can answer one card after another. You can get points. If you answer something wrong, you get negative points. So you're encouraged to watch a related video, or you're encouraged to answer the quiz again. And if you get something right, then you're obviously shown a hurrah, you're shown positive appreciation. So that's been the case even now. And that's been pretty interesting, as well as shocking to us, because we initially thought that this population, when we started the initial study in 2017, we thought that this population was prone more to audiovisual content, whereas the content consumption patterns later on show that if we gave them text, and if we gave them informational text with an interactive GIF format, they were more likely to also consume that. So in just 2019, we had over 110,000 downloads. Today we have over 150,000 downloads. Most of these downloads had taken place through Share It. I'm not sure if you guys know of Share It, but it's a Chinese app that's been pretty prevalent around the world. And in many countries, people don't use Google Play Store to download apps from Play Store, but they basically use Share It to share not only messages, photos, files, but they also share apps with each other through Share It. So technically, Google Play does not get any of this download information, but the number of users that hit our database and the number of sessions that were being generated, from that we could basically deduce that there was a high amount of users who were registering on the app outside just the regular Google Play usership. We had generated a lot of transactions. As I said, when people would earn points to redeem them for nutritious food stuff, we generated a lot of transactions, and we could track these transactions through the two apps that we had created. So the partner app would basically record these transactions, and the Kirana store keepers would redeem these points and record those transactions on their app. So close to about $50,000 of products were given away in a matter of 6 months. I think what we had to do was we had to turn the tap down later on and say that people could also chip in and pay a certain amount of money. We experimented also if people are willing to pay, let's say 20% of the cost of a particular item in order to gain access to a nutritious foodstuff. The remaining would come from the points that they'd earn in the app. And what is surprising is that over the next 3 months, we had found that people were willing to do even that. So in terms of access, Sarthal today is probably a reliable source of information in Hindi and to some extent in Hindi and English, or we call it Hinglish, and in over 25 Indian cities. We've had statistical analysis of the overall knowledge increase in people's families because of being on South Health. For example, 60% of the families started boiling water, started actually cooking the water that they were drinking before drinking. It's actually hard to assume that these people have clean drinking water in their homes, but they also don't have a water filter. So some of the easiest ways to get your water clean would be to just boil it and then let the water cool down and consume it. So 60% of South Health users started reporting that they started boiling water after watching our videos. More than 80% of South Health viewers or consumers started adding more proteins to their children's plates as well as their own plates. So they actually started understanding the importance of having a proteinaceous diet in order to prevent disease, in order to improve the child's growth, but also generally to help the body's metabolic processes. So a lot of parents in Mumbai and Delhi ended up changing their diet and their lifestyle over the last 2.5 years. We've managed to launch South Health through other platforms. So what we've been doing is we've been partnering with other agencies in India. When we started off this study, this was initially funded by Johnson & Johnson, but we also had a few publications through this initial research in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. This year, we are publishing in 2 different journals. So there is Frontiers in Science, where we have published a paper on the effect of user-centric design and mobile applications on people's dietary habits. So that's been accepted and that's being published this year. We've also submitted and we're close to publication of another paper in the Academy of Computer Machinery. So that's the ACM conference that was supposed to be scheduled in Ecuador earlier this year. Also on the use of machine learning in order to send recommendations. So what we're doing is we're integrating recommendations using machine learning. We built a recommendation engine that basically uses collaborative filtering and hybrid filtering to send recommendations to users who register on an app to get the right kind of videos based on either their consumption or the consumption of the target group. So based on their demographics and based on user patterns. We've briefly like to, I already mentioned Aditi Ganju, who's our co-founder, who's on this call. Dr. Akash Ganju is our founder and CEO. He's actually a health tech entrepreneur who's been running several health programs and health technology programs over the last 9 years. And then there's Abhijit Kumar. Abhijit is our head of partnerships, who was also the man behind the large-scale acquisition of Indian parents in the cities of Mumbai and Delhi. But also now with partnerships with larger NGOs and trusts in India, is helping to expand the face of South Health in the Indian community. So what we've done in terms of pure design in 2018 was give people a basic app. And we were reaching out to, let's say, economically forward men, with, women who were dependent on them, with an, these are families with an average income of about 25,000 rupees. That's about $300 in a month, 300 US dollars in a month. We had a mix of naive users. A lot of these users had never seen a smartphone before, or especially the women were not so exposed to these smartphones. But if they were digitally exposed to a combination of Hindi and English medium content. And the lack of scientific content or the lack of schooling, as I mentioned earlier, was a predominant factor that we were running through. So we'd come up with an app interface in 2018 that was very basic, that had very few movements, that had very few interactive elements. So on the left, you can see the user app where we had 3 tabs, and each of the tabs basically had list views of videos, quizzes, and infographics. There was a section for your points somewhere here. And then there was nothing else. There was no other high-level navigation here. You could see your location, and worst case, you could share your app. And the partner app was just an app for recruitment. So you could enter somebody's phone number here, and you could either create a sale, or you could basically add a new customer to the system, and you would see your earnings and transactions basically in this section. This is what we started off with in our premise in 2018. What we learned was that the Indian population was changing. We started off with a simplistic UI, and we probably ended up getting a short-term engagement. What we were trying to go towards is the changing knowledge levels of Indian population. So most of these people aren't dumb. They're people who are exposed to everything from TikTok to high-level gaming apps. There was a high surge in app usage in terms of social media. Mobile internet had become very, very cheap. In fact, today, mobile internet in India is so cheap that people with as much as $20 in their pocket can basically spend about $3 to $4 in a month and get easy access to high-speed 4G internet. And what also happened was our app was initially, I mean, this app that was developed in 2018 was about 15 MB, but it was still occupying a lot of space. The footprint it was creating was about 70 MB on the Android phones. And people had a lot of photos and videos on their phones, which they would not delete. So the size of the app was also a problem. So what we've done is we'd refactored our code. We'd come up with a very basic native Android app. Initially, we had a React Native app that was developed completely for high-level interactivity and animations. We came down to something that was purely native. We struck down a lot of design elements and ended up focusing on, some key elements that would help augment users. One, give them full autonomy over the app. Don't recommend, don't prescribe the journey that they need to go through, but help them play a game, help them play enough on the app in order to discover more and increase their learning curve. And another key thing that we did was we removed a lot of cluttering and we made the design a lot more cleaner. So what happened was we came up with a completely different app layout where we had videos with different topic categories. There was a clear segregation of sections of media. The quiz journey became slightly more interactive with a sort of a topic plus also a level interactivity. Under each topic, they could basically access different kinds of videos. So they could literally scroll up, they could click around, and they could circle back to the content, as well as a leaderboard that was highly interactive that gave them not only their journey in a more colorful manner, but also gave them some sort of a hall of fame where they could see their own position, but also see who else was in which level. Fortunately or unfortunately, this design worked for the starting, but what we also found out over the next couple of months, over the next 8 to 9 months in 2019, was that some of these elements, especially the quiz journey, was very confusing for them. They couldn't really understand how this ladder was going up or whether this was supposed to go into some sort of a complex game. There were some other elements that we had to declutter and come up with. And in early this year, we ended up actually making even more simplistic. So we made a slightly more deeper research of how content was being consumed. And we found that there were difficulties in people going from a more hierarchical approach on a dashboard to topics. There was a difficulty from navigating from this screen and getting lost on the screen versus going into each and every individual page. So what we did later on was we again decluttered the entire app and moved into a more cleaner version where we gave icons or this iconography to the topics. We gave them access to a highlight section right on top. So more like your moving carousel or a moving banner on the top of many e-commerce platforms like Amazon or Lazada. And we also started adding recommendations to their list. So people had a preview of what the app looked like, including a tutorial before they even signed up. On top, if they clicked on any of these topics, they could basically swipe between videos and quizzes. So they had a lot of left to right swipe movements where they could literally scan through each topic and see what videos were there, what quizzes were there. The quiz journey became a lot more simpler because we introduced the same pattern of swiping and navigation as in the videos. So they could quickly answer a question and move on to the next topic. We also improved something called an Ask Us section. So basically people were asking a lot of questions, but they had no real area to reach out of the app because this was a unidirectional interaction on the app. You come on the app, you sign up, you learn something, you interact, and then you go. There was no way you could add feedback or there was no way you could ask inquisitive questions. So what we did is we ended up with a tile structure that had some pre-recorded questions that would lead to the same videos and quizzes. But on the other hand, we also provided them with an extra section where they could add another question that was not met on the app and send us a WhatsApp message. So we started collecting also feedback from people in terms of what other topics they would want to have information on. So we moved literally from a very basic app that dealt with people in a very simplistic fashion to a lot more modern and a lot more I would say, socially relevant and socially current context of mobile apps. And this is how we've gone ahead in pure design terms. What we're adding now on the plate is, I mentioned recommendations, and what we're trying to build out right now is a health recommender system. And what this health recommender system can do is basically look at two primary goals of any mobile app or any content-driven app. One, how do I reduce the number of people who are dropping off my app? How do I also classify users into different cohorts so I know which user is consuming what kind of content, as well as which user is not consuming content? And also, how can I use contextual messaging and recommendations in order to support people's journey? So it's a combination of recommendations as well as predictions that we are trying to build. And the goal that we're trying to do, and we've started off with one of the key elements of testing this out using A/B testing, is how are people performing when they get these additional nudges versus a quorum of people who do not get any nudges at all. So we're doing this initial analysis. We've been running our A/B tests since the last 3 months using collaborative and hybrid filtering, and we are recording our results. But as you know, when you have a large user base, let's say we have about 15,000 active users on an app today, it still takes a lot of time to observe user patterns and deduce specific insights in terms of how people are consuming content in order to improve our algorithms. So we're in the process of improving our A/B testing mechanism, but also what we're trying to focus on is every time we get data from the system, we are trying to also wrangle this data. We're trying to also clean up this data, because some of the times we have users who are partly visitors. So they get a preview of the app and they don't register. They end up watching content. So there are a lot of guest users, a lot of ghost users on our app whose data we record, as well as we have also a lot of registered users on our app who have been on the app for about 3 months. Then they go off the app, they uninstall, and they come back on the app after about 6 to 8 months when they notice that their children's health is deteriorating. So they come back to a reliable source of information and they start using the app. So they again, skew up the user journey. They're not users who are consistently on the app as if they signed up for a complete program. So what we do is a continuous process of data cleaning, wrangling, and building models or refining our algorithms based on the data that we see. Where we're headed in the health recommender system in 2021, I'd like to leave you guys a little bit of a snapshot, and I hope I'm not stealing too much time for this. What we're trying to do is we've built the base or the fundament of data engineering, where we are analyzing the data we're getting. We're able to visualize it. We're able to put it on real-time dashboards, but we're also able to structure the data clearly in the formats we're getting. One of the key advantages we have is we do not have manual entry of data. So there is no collusion. There is no, I would say, clouding of data through manual entry or human error. So a big advantage we have is that we have digital data that's being recorded through a phone. But that can also end up skewing the data too much because we have purely user-reported data from a platform. The second thing that we've been doing is we're trying to combine app data. We're trying to purely look at consumption in terms of what kinds of content they were consuming. We're also churning out quizzes that are more market survey or market research quizzes that help users report or self-report informational changes. So that we ask them questions in terms of, what are the common food products that they use or at home when they think of protein, for example, or how many times do they drink water, or do their children drink water in a day, or do they know what the ill effects of insufficient iron are. So we ask them also a lot of other questions in order to do a pre and a post research and to determine the knowledge levels of these users. What we're trying to get at additionally is the use of health records. So we have a feature in the app where people can record their child's height, weight, BMI. They can also record it for themselves. They can also add more family members. And we're also trying to get access to more of these, I would say, health informational markers from people. But what we're trying to build is a construct that's going to be a time series comparison of people's health over a period of time. So for this, we would probably need a longer time of research where we're able to look at what did these people report as their child's weight at the beginning of the program versus 6 months later versus 12 months later. So that's a longer project that's still in the go. What we are trying to build through this recommended system is obviously a preventative course monitor. So in case we know that children's health is going towards more malnourishment, or if we know that a user who's constantly reporting negative attributes towards any quizzes asked, then there are certain things that need to be taken into consideration. For example, if we would integrate South Health with a health system, with a local health or monitoring authority, such as the State Health Corporation or the Health Secretary's office, one of the key markers that we could also deliver to them is what are the nutritional intakes or what are the patterns of nutritional intake in low and middle income communities in an urban settlement. How much percentage of the population is actually prone to malnourishment, is actually prone to stunted growth or to anemia versus their on the ground studies and surveys. Now in the time of COVID, a lot of the government organizations are not able to go on the ground or engage with actual people in order to do a detailed qualitative research. So a mobile app, for example, makes it very, very easy for putting health knowledge in the hands of people. We recently had a discussion with the Mumbai Metropolitan Corporation in terms of probably coming up with a health solution on a mobile app also for the schools, so that children in these schools would be able to get more information in terms of how to manage their own health. That would include nutritional information, that would include obviously everything around the videos and the content that we put on South Health, but also additional information with respect to COVID and hygiene. What we can look at as an additional factor is if a health system integrated South Health and our algorithms, what would be the end savings for them? What would be their savings in terms of medical expenses? So we're also trying to come up with a logic in order to predict what would be the overall return on investment, savings on investment if people would use our platform as a service, rather than just look at it as a content or information platform. So what we are building is, in the next 6 to 8 months, is a more robust system that will capture data from different patterns, but also help the authorities who are manning these systems or running these systems to better administer health facilities in an underserved urban settlement. So a lot of urban settlements in India are underserved. There's insufficient beds, there's insufficient number of doctors, there's insufficient care and outreach. So this would actually help solve one of the larger problems in our society. So that's where we're sort of heading. Okay, I'm probably going to stop now. Please let me know, Pallavi.
Yeah, thank you so much, Srini, for that presentation. It was very interesting, especially to learn how user interface is trying to, solve those issues of mobile illiteracy. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. We'll see you back soon during the Q&A. All right, thank you. We'll now move on to our third company, which is Global Himalayan Expedition. And so I'll leave the floor to you, Jadip.
Yeah, hi Keshav. Thank you so much for having us on this platform. Am I audible properly?
Yeah, I can hear you, Steve.
Okay, great. And I also have my colleague Vishal with me. And I'll just share my screen. Can you see my slides now?
Yes, all good.
Okay, perfect. Now, Keshav, before we start, how much time do I have so that we can plan accordingly?
We're good to go till 8:30, so I'm willing to shorten our Q&A for you as well.
So sorry, what's the time there now? Hello.
Hello. Yeah. You have 20 to 25.
We have until 4 p.m. for no 20-25 minutes. Sorry.
Okay, got it. That's good. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out to hear more about what we at Global Himalayan Expedition are doing. in bringing, in leveraging technology and tourism to bring development to the Himalayan communities. Now, when you look at the name Global Himalayan Expedition, the first thing that comes to your mind is a travel company. What is a travel company doing in a conference on Engineer Without Borders? But I think as we go through the slides, that answer will become quite obvious. Moving forward, globally, to give you a context, there are more than 800 million people that are still living in darkness without access to energy. Now, these communities live in some of the most beautiful and remote locations of the earth. So when you look at this picture, this is a Himalayan village. The first thought that comes to your mind is just, wow, just look at the landscape. They have fresh organic food, clean glacial water. But what happens when the sun goes down? The communities end up using kerosene lamps for their lighting needs, which produces a lot of toxic fumes, which are harmful to the young and the elderly. Now imagine if I put you in a room which is closed from all sides, and the only source of lighting is, kerosene lamps that emit a lot of toxic fumes. You start gagging, your eyes start watering. It's not a pleasant place to be in. So what's happening is, due to the lack of these basic facilities and the lack of education and livelihood, it results in the people migrating. So the young people are leaving behind these villages and migrating to the towns, which results in a lost culture, lost heritage, and lost villages. So what we at GHE are doing is, we are a social enterprise that is leveraging sustainable tourism to provide clean energy and livelihood access for these communities. And our vision and mission is to empower these communities through growth opportunities and impact 1 million lives by 2025. Now, what we are doing essentially is, at the core of it, we start with access to clean energy, digital education, livelihood, and this ultimately alleviates poverty in these areas and helps us achieve 8 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And through this entire platform, we are able to leverage, like I mentioned, technology and tourism as a joint force for the holistic development of these remote, fragile communities. Now, if you're wondering, how does tourism come into picture? Well, let me take you through an expedition of how travelers join us to bring solar energy to these villages. Well, first, this is how the roads look like. So you end up going on these dirt roads for days and days. When the roads end, you start trekking. You start walking for miles and miles. We end up crossing mountain passes at more than 4,000 meters, 5,000 meters before we reach these villages. And this is from one of the expeditions last year. We had 20 people from 7 different countries who joined this expedition. When you finally, and this is sometimes the situation can get tricky. This is the team navigating down a mountain pass at 17,000 feet. And yes, it does snow, and conditions can get really tough in the mountain areas. But what happens when you finally reach the village? You get greeted by a culture and heritage that is centuries old. Most of these villages, they have been there for, more than 500, 600 years. And so this is how the traditional cultural welcome is. And this is the community welcoming you into their village, into their homes, into their, entire environment. Then once the village welcome is done, our teams start working. You start setting up the solar panels on the roof of the houses, and then you go inside the houses and you put up the LED light bulb holders and all the other electronics. How does the community react? I mean, this lady, when she saw us putting a light bulb holder, she's a 80-year-old lady who had never seen what a light bulb is. And when we started putting up the light bulb fixtures, she was just thanking us. And we had not even switched on the light. This was just putting up the fixtures, and this was her reaction. And so this is how much it means to them, access to technology, access to energy. And so this is the impact you're able to create. I mean, this entire village was electrified end to end in just 2.5 days. That is the power of technology. If implemented in the right manner, this is the change that technology can bring in. And this expedition had, like I mentioned, 20 people who had joined us along with our engineers. So there's a whole team that goes in, and in just 2.5 days, this is the impact you're able to create. Till date, we have electrified more than 130 villages to impact the lives of 60,000 indigenous communities in the Himalayas. And we have been able to offset more than 8,700 tons of carbon emission by eliminating the kerosene lamps that the communities use with clean and renewable energy. How does the process work? Is it easy? Is it easy to identify these villages? Well, first you have to go on these remote areas in uncharted areas. None of these villages are on Google Maps. Once you go there, it does not work that you just find a village and then the next thing you do is end up in the village with solar panels and batteries and say, hey guys, we are your saviors, we are going to electrify. It does not work that way. You first have to understand the needs of the community. What do they really want? Are they does the community have a buy-in to the kind of technology that you want to implement? Do they understand this technology? And this mobilization or understanding the needs of the community is the most important aspect of this entire impact activity. Without it, you are just shooting in the dark. So this allows us to tailor make solutions. This allows us to modify the technology so that it can best suit the needs of the community. It's a grounds up approach. It's a pull approach. The community wants things, that's why we give it to them. And there is a contribution from the community as well. The saying goes, don't feed a fish, teach a person how to fish. And that's what the mobilization piece is exactly about. And this is what I meant by that. We asked the community to open a bank account, a community account of the village, where every household puts in close to $2, $2 a month, and this money keeps accumulating. The idea behind this is this money serves as a way for the communities to maintain the grid. So if there is any problem with the solar grids, the community has the money in this account. They can call up the service engineer. The service engineer comes, repairs, and goes back, and the going back and coming and the repair charges can be carried out from this community account. So this allows the communities to not only self-sustain, but also to scale up the infrastructure. Till that time, we do not have this account book. We do not move forward with the process of electrification. Once we have the community buy-in, then the next step is transporting the grid material. And the only way you can do that is by carrying it on your back. And the terrain is really tough, or by carrying it on horses and donkeys. Now, when I was giving this presentation at one of the science conferences, one of the professors in the audience, he asked, why are you carrying such small systems? Why don't you carry a big system? And to him, my answer was, I can, but I need to ask the donkey. The donkey and the horse decide what kind of grid sizing can you do? What is the size of the solar panel and battery? If the donkey says, I cannot carry more than 20 kgs of load, that determines your grid sizing on the ground. So it's sort of, you can create whatever solutions you want on a piece of paper, but the donkey tells you the actual implementation that is going to happen. And once the material reaches the village, like I said, 2.5 to 3 days is what it takes for our teams to set up the solar panels, put up the light fixtures, install the street lights, and bring light to these remote villages. This is the same village, before and after in just one day. This village was just electrified in a matter of a day. We entered the village on 17th August, and on 18th August, the village had light in each and every room. And that's how simple and frugal the technology is. And this is the kind of impact. The same rooms with kerosene lamps now have LED lights in each and every room. In fact, these communities have a much advanced version of lighting because they are able to tap the sun, produce their own power, consume their own power. They're not dependent on a big grid infrastructure for their lighting needs. And that is the future of electricity, which is already there in these Himalayan villages. And this is a snapshot of these villages with LED lights inside and street lights outside to really light up this village. I mean, when you sometimes go to these areas, all you see is pitch darkness. But then once the light comes up, it's just a celebration and joy that happens in these villages. And that's how people react. I mean, if I ask you, when was the last time you entered a room that was dark, you switched on the light and you started dancing? That's how the communities respond. They start dancing, they start crying, they start looking at the light bulb. This is one of the Buddhist monks, very senior monks. When the light got switched on in his room, he just started looking at the light bulb and started praying before it. I think this is what you can say is religion and science really coming together in terms of, and to really depict what it means for these communities. And in the process, we have taken more than 1,300 participants, students, corporate people, travelers from 60 different countries who have been part of these impact expeditions. Now, the technology, since you are come from an engineering background, the technology that we use is a DC microgrid technology, a direct controller microgrid technology. And it's really simple. You put the solar panel on the roof, the batteries go inside the house, you put a charge controller which regulates the current from the panel to the batteries, and you just wire it up. It's a very plug and play kind of a solution. And why direct current? Why not alternating current that we all get at our homes? One, these villages are so remote. There is no healthcare facilities. And if the person gets a shock in the village, the nearest hospital is 3 to 4 days of trek. Imagine walking for 4 days to get a basic health access. And so that's why the solution has to be simple. It has to be safe. It is easier to implement, and it allows us to give a better output in terms of the energy efficiency, because you don't convert from DC to AC, because the solar panel is direct current, the batteries are direct current. It allows for maximum efficiency to put up a DC infrastructure. Now, it's not just about the Himalayas. We've also started looking at the northeast part of India. So we started in the mountain areas, and then we moved to the jungle areas. And you can see the innovation here from the community. To put up this solar panel, they've made a frame out of wood from their local produce. And this design was made by a local villager. And now this design is being copied by everyone in these communities. That's how, when you think of it, when you come to design thinking, you can put all those things. But sometimes when you are faced with a problem, the best of the best people will come up with very innovative solutions that you can't even think about. And this is, again, how you bring light to these remote villages and the jungles. You have to walk again for days and days into these jungle regions. And then you approach the villages, and then, you're setting up the solar panels and the lights. This is how people carry the batteries on their shoulders. And, it shows the commitment. Imagine walking like this with a 50 kilogram of battery for more than 3 days. And it truly goes to show the commitment of these villagers to bring development to their own villages. For us, the idea is no one should be left behind, because we talk about achieving the sustainable development goals by 2030. We can only do that if we are able to reach out to the remotest communities. SDG goals cannot be fulfilled in New York or a Paris or a Adelaide or a Melbourne. They have to be fulfilled in these remote communities, and only then can we achieve a truly better and equitable world for everyone. It's also about empowering the communities. So we put a lot of focus on, before we start any electrification project, we train the local people as both as women and as men. We train them as solar engineers. And what it does is truly enables these communities to not only install these systems, but also to maintain and upkeep. So it makes our job easier when you have trained and empowered communities. And this is, again, we do it in partnership with the local governments. So this was all the men that were trained as solar engineers for the first time. None of them knew what a diode is. None of them had picked up a screwdriver, and now they're all solar engineers. But my favorite are my women engineers. I mean, they used to be housewives. They had no exposure of engineering, and now they are going around and electrifying their own communities. They are much better skilled and equipped than our male engineers, I'll be honest with you. But it's just heartening to see that if you provide the right avenues, people just tap into their potential and truly come up with magical things. And this is how, once again, when the light comes on, it's just a different feeling. And I think the feeling of the light coming on is just, you can see the happiness on the faces of the people and the children. And this is what motivates us in our team to reach out to the remotest communities. I mean, it's not easy to go to these places. It's risky. There are a lot of challenges, but I think this smile, the idea that our work can bring a smile on someone's face, is what really motivates us. And it's, what we do is we do it in partnership with the local governments. And how does that help us? Well, the Indian government was facing a challenge in the 2019 Indian elections, where they had 200 polling stations where they could not power up, because they could not have, it was not possible for them to have the people vote because there was no energy infrastructure. So they contacted us. We made a modular solution, and we airlifted in minus 20 degrees Celsius. We airlifted all these nanogrids to these remote locations, and our engineers went there with our portable solar grids, and it enabled more than 5,000 people to be part of the Indian democratic elections. And this is how technology can truly, truly benefit people on the ground if it is applied in the right manner. What happens when you have access to energy? Well, the next logical step for us is access to education. We all are privileged here to be having access to Zoom, having access to internet. I'll take you to your peers, to your friends in Himalayas who don't even know what a computer is. They do not have access to internet. They don't have access to mobile connectivity. So what we do is we set up these low powered innovation centers in these Himalayan communities powered by Raspberry Pi. And we take up all the information. Now there is no internet, but how can I provide them with internet? So what we do is we take up a Wi-Fi router with 1 terabyte of capacity, preload Khan Academy, Wikipedia, TED Talk, and all these curriculum on this Wi-Fi server, install it in the school, and it creates a local hotspot. So now students can access all the information. So they can do Wikipedia. They can look up Engineer Without Borders. They can look up ebooks. They can look at inspiring TED Talks, and that's how you're able to truly use very simple solutions, but to create access to education for these kids, so that one day they can also be working on projects in tandem with you. And it's all about technology at the end of the day. So now I think I've removed the notion that we are a tourism company. We are a very hardcore technology company that is leveraging tourism as a vehicle for development. I hope that answers the question on who are we? Are we a technology or a tourism company? And we have these microcontrollers, smart controllers, which are not, where what we are doing now, every village where we install a solar grid has this microcontroller. Now this microcontroller will also have a local Wi-Fi mesh network. So now we are creating mesh networks in these villages to allow intra-village connectivity, because there is no mobile connectivity. So we are piggybacking the Wi-Fi signals and creating a local mesh network and develop an app by which villagers can talk to each other without shouting. Now, all this is fine. You have access to energy, you have access to education, but it's not just about a light bulb, but how can that light bulb lead to economic advancement of these communities? And that is where my colleague Vishal will come in, and he will talk about the livelihood generation for these communities through tourism. Vishal, over to you.
Thank you, Jaideep. Hope I'm audible.
Yeah, you are.
So as JD shared in the very beginning of the slide deck, there were three basic challenges that these remote communities faced, right? One of which was the lack of basic amenities, basic facilities. The second one was lack of education, and the third, livelihood, which led to out-migration. So we've covered the two first problems, which was basic amenities in terms of electricity, and the second one in terms of education through HICs. Let's come to the livelihood part. Now you've given these communities, a platform where they now are ready to sustain by themselves. But in order for them to be actually sustainable and resilient in their nature, now the Mountain Homestays project comes into place. We're trying to leverage tourism to create livelihood cycle in these remote communities by setting up solar homestays. And so that, these communities, they are generation old communities, they have picturesque landscapes, and now they're open for you to travel to. And since these are not the travel hotspots, these are actually very remotely based. So there's no chance of you actually going into a place where everyone ends up going, or it's a crowded place, and you actually get to interact with the communities. Stay with the overall concept of homestays is that you stay with these communities and interact with them. And by setting up these homestays, we actually set up these homestays in a very clean energy manner. As JD shared, once you electrify the whole village for basic electricity, we then empower a selected group of houses within the community to set them up as homestays by providing them with additional solar panels that are required to run these additional rooms, providing solar water heaters so that these communities can sustain in the winters, and also greenhouses, because in these communities what happens is they have very limited time for produce of agricultural as well. So introducing greenhouses, all these methods of sustainable development into these particular communities empowers them in a different way. And as you can see, we've created almost 55 homestays in the Himalayas and restored more than 20 heritage sites. Now, these heritage sites are the monasteries and local centuries-old homes that we're going to talk about in a little more. And all of this is done keeping in mind that we are empowering the women as well. As JD shared, the women are trained in terms of taking care of the electrical grid. At the same time, they are also trained on the hospitality aspect of it, so that once you travel to these homestays, you're not settling for something less. You're actually getting more out when you're traveling to these communities and staying with them. And this is where the last segment of our call comes in, the problem of preserving the heritage. these communities, as we've all talked about, they have centuries old heritage and culture, which is now being lost because there's no actual projects going on about preservation or reviving these cultures. And that is where mountain museums comes into place. If you move on to the next slide, you'll see now this is inside a 250-year-old house, and you can see these artifacts, these pots. Now they've not been preserved properly. They're rusting. They're covered with dust, and that is where the heritage is now getting lost. And that is where mountain museums comes into play. What we're trying to do is, once you set up these homestays and once the village has been electrified, we're trying to leverage solar energy and converting these, centuries old structures, these structures that are now inhabited or unattended, into something more, attractive, so that once a traveler goes into this community and decides to stay within a homestay, you visit this museum, and then again you're empowering the community, creating that complete cycle of livelihood, so that the out migration that we discussed about in the very beginning of the session, that is reduced, that is stopped. And that is the overall vision of mountain museums as well. Some features that I'd like to just quickly go through about mountain museums is that these are now regional themed museums. If you can move on the next slide, JD. These are now these museums are actually very regional themed. If you go into Ladakh, where we operated, or if you go into the northeast of India, these museums are actually catering to one specific region, and then discovering the Silk Route, or the Changthang region, the nomadic pastorals, or the petroglyphs that are found in these regions. And as I shared, these are all solar-powered structures. They are living museums. The concept of living museums is very new in India. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to select a particular house where there's a couple of rooms available for converting into a museum. If a family still lives there, it's best for us, because now when a traveler goes into these communities, visits these museums, they actually get to be with the locals and experience their life. And at the same time, now there's a cultural exchange happening here, and also preservation of the heritage. And that is what mountain museums is about. Another quick project that we're going to talk about is Astro Stays, the Astro Tourism at Man Pangong. Now, this is one of its kind initiative in India, where what we're trying to do is we've trained up these locals in these remote communities to operate telescopes and be open to open to travelers and show them these celestial bodies that we also fascinated about. At the same time, touching all these SDGs. The idea here is to promote and boost the local economy by interaction with these travelers and promoting sustainable tourism along the way. These now this particular project called Astro Stays is not just about you going in and looking at a telescope. It's an all-in-one package where these telescopes are operated by the locals. They are maintained by the locals, and they probably at times know more than me about astronomy and celestial objects when I go into these locations. And this is how it is. The locals are trained enough to use apps to show us what these constellations are, what they mean. At the same time, there's a cultural exchange happening in terms of them telling you about the folklore of the region. Ages old stories about how these stars were or what they've heard in their childhood. So this kind of initiative is first of its kind. And if you move on the next one, you'll see that you're not settling out for something less. So part of this Astro Stay is this prestige homestay as well, where you can choose to stay for the night, interact with the local. You go into a village such as Man in Pangong, you interact with the locals, you stay in this particular beautiful homestay. In the night, you go out and see these stars. And now we're also setting up first a community Astro Park in India, in the center of India. Now imagine a place where you just go in and there's multiple telescopes that you can go through. There's an observatory, there's a planetarium, there's all different kinds of activities happening. And this is again all solar powered. So we're trying to promote astronomy through clean energy through this. And all of this there's a common linkage that JD has just shown up. As you can see on your screen, it's HTIS, Homestay Travel Information Server. So what you've done is this server is based on Raspberry Pi, and this is a low-powered server. And what it does is for any traveler who goes into a remote community where language can become a barrier, or the traveler wants to know more about the history or heritage of the region, or just understand the basic geography of the region. Sometimes the language becomes a barrier, and that is where HTIS comes into play. This is an offline server, so you just scan a QR code on your phone, and you have this app on your phone. You open it up, you can go through, what all is there in the village. It could be the overview of the village, your overview about the homestay, the a nearest monastery, what all kind of foods are available, what all can you explore nearby, all these kind of things. So the idea here is, and it'll also have photographs and videos. The idea here is to promote tourism in a way that it's accessible to travelers from throughout the world, and at the same time keeping it very simple for the communities to host as well. Since these servers are very low powered and pre-programmed, the communities don't have to really do anything, but they can do basic diagnosis if needed. And as you can see, it's a network of servers throughout the different regions, wherein you connect to one server and you get information about the whole region, and it makes it easy for you to plan out your trip as well. So leveraging all these different technological advancements in tourism to promote sustainable tourism is what we're trying to do towards mountain museums and mountain homestays. And after this is over to you, JD.
Thank you so much, Vishal. And so if you've been, if you go through what we have been doing, is essentially looking at how can technology be an way to sort of drive responsible livelihood creation for these communities. And that's where Demetra, our latest project, comes in. Now, in a post-COVID world, we believe that both the travelers will need confidence to visit these communities, and the communities also need confidence that if someone is coming from the outside, are they medically safe? Is it medically okay to host them? And so that's where we've come up with a new solution, which we call as Demetra. It's essentially a health monitoring system, which will have all these various parameters that we can measure, whether it is temperature, blood pressure, oxygen levels, blood sugar, airflow sensor, skin response sensor, and all this is again powered up using solar energy. So imagine this device being put in the village. You walk in, you get your diagnosis checked. It will give you a green or red based on your health, and it will also be able to store the data for a month, so that if later if someone has COVID, then it can inform you based on data tracking that you should be keeping safe. And also for the villagers, like I said, the nearest hospital is 3 days away. This allows them to do a quick early diagnosis and also make a much better informed decision before they actually venture out for a 3-day trek to the nearest health access. And so again, it's a very simple solution. There'll be a QR code, you scan the code and you get a notification and you're able to access all your data. In the interest of time, I'll just skip through this. Now, our vision is to create smart and sustainable villages that have connectivity, that have sustainability, that are solar powered, that have empowered communities, and to truly create unique offerings for the communities so that it makes them viable. Again, I come back to my first point. The communities now are actually experiencing reverse migration, in the sense the people that left the villages to be in the cities are now coming back to these villages because they see that there is so much now in the village. Our initiative has been featured by the National Geographic as part of a documentary, and also by the BBC. Both these documentaries are online, and if you are interested, I'll also share the links for both of them in the chat box. And we've been awarded by the highest tourism and technology platforms across the globe for the work that we are doing in sustainable tourism and technology. And if you allow me, I will just take 2 more minutes and take you guys through, in case if that is of interest, is what we do with universities and students as part of our student expeditions. Just allow me 1 second as I share the screen. So we've been working with both the Harvard University as well as high schools in Zurich, where their students now come every year as part of an expedition, as part of a learning curriculum to electrify villages on the ground. And so that's been happening for the past 3 years now. And I'll just show you some snippets of how that works in case that is of interest to anyone to pursue further. Just give me 1 second as I open up the slide deck. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay. Okay. Can you see my screen? Just a second. Yeah, can you see my screen now?
Yep.
Okay, so I'll just skip through this because we only have 2 minutes as per Keshav. So again, it's about providing a classroom in the Himalayas and allowing students to find their purpose and create a tangible impact while being able to create a meaningful impact on the local communities. And so what we have is different modules. We have a climate positive impact expeditions. All these expeditions are carbon negative in nature. So we have these different programs. I won't go into much details. I'll share these with you later, but we have a microgrids for rural empowerment. It's a 10-day program in the Meghalaya and the Ladakh region of India. Then we have a low carbon innovation for resilient communities. This is another program that we have. Of course, all these programs for this year were cancelled, so we'll be running these programs next year. Every program has 15 to 20 students that join us. And again, they have a different sort of specific offerings that cater to specific interest of the student groups. Then we have the, if you are interested in restoration, so we have a community museums for cultural conservation. This is the third program that we have. And then we have a high altitude renewable energy innovation. So, you come on the ground and you innovate with us on the technology piece as well. And so these are the different programs that we have. And this is just a snippet of the Harvard University coming in and electrifying a village. So the students, they worked around the clock to put up the light bulb holders and the panels. And yeah, so I think I'll leave it at that. And these are some of the universities that we are working with and some of our alumni, along with the corporates that are engaged with us. So yeah, I'll stop at that, but this was just to give you an idea of how things work at our end in terms of engaging student communities. So thank you so much, everyone. I'll stop here and happy to take up any question and answers or, over to you, Keshav, in terms of how do you want to take it forward.
All right, thanks so much, Jaydeep. Thank you for bearing with running late. So what we'll do now is we'll hear very quickly from two young professionals. They've been very patient with us as well about where they come from. And what we'll do is, if you are still available, stay on for the next 15 minutes. Jaydeep and Vaishal, are you available for that time?
Yeah, we'll be there.
Yep.
Okay. And Srini, if you're still here, we'd love to have you on for the next 15 minutes as well. And we'll try to rapid fire some audience questions. So I'll pass on to Danica first, and then in the meanwhile, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat, and I'll try and get to some of them. All right, Danica.
Hi everyone. So they just asked me to talk through a little bit about where I've come from and what I'm doing now. So I studied environmental engineering at UNSW, and my first taste of humanitarian engineering was on Design Summit with about half the people in this call. Pallavi and I shared a room, and we went to a Nepali village, and the project that we focused on with our Design Summit was looking at educating women in the community, as we saw that was quite a big barrier between the language level between men and women. And then going on from that, UNSW offers a third year humanitarian engineering degree, so I took that. A lot of the stuff we learned in that was similar to what we learned in Design Summit, and as part of that we had to critically analyse a humanitarian engineering technology. So we looked at a membrane filter that is solar powered, that they use in Kenya. So we critically analysed that. And that was kind of our major project as part of that subject. And then following on from that, the fourth year humanitarian engineering subject that UNSW offer, I took that. And that was really great because it was very much like a student-led project. So we had a representative from a foundation called Love Mercy come and speak to us. And they have a program that they run called Sense for Seeds, where they provide seeds, a seed loan to women in communities in Uganda. And in exchange, they grow the seeds throughout the year and then they harvest the seeds at the end and they've got to give some back. However, the issue that they had was for a few years in a row, women, the rains have always come the fourth week of February. So the women in the community were always expecting that they could plant in the fourth week of February and that their plants would grow, but due to climate change, changing weather patterns, For a few years in a row, that didn't happen. They lost all their seeds. So they came to us looking kind of for a solution to that. I think they came to us hoping that we were going to create some sort of irrigation system with a solar pump or something. But this is when it becomes really important to actually take a step back and do your how might we statement before you go rushing into solutions. Because our how might we statement that we came up with was to make them more resilient. I wrote it down. Be more resilient to rainfall fluctuations. So one of the final solution after we brainstormed and developed ideas was that we came to is actually we needed to provide better weather data to the community, because by installing pumps, all these things, it raises a whole bunch of other issues, whereas the community know what to do. They just need more accurate and available weather data. So they've actually taken that and it's gone on to become a student-led project. They're hoping to make their own startup and their business from it. Unfortunately, I had to step away because I'm not a student anymore. I graduated, but they're still going ahead with that. I'm sure there's UNSW people in the group that know all about it. It's really great. And then from that, I went for I did a summer vacation student program with Arup. I got into that basically off the back of all this humanitarian stuff. They were super interested in it. So now I'm within the water team day to day, mainly do water sensitive urban design stuff with Sydney Water, but Arup are really great in that they take some of their profits and put them back into the company in programs called Invest in Arup. So as part of that, they have a goal that 100% of their Invest in Arup projects have to relate to an SDG in some way. However, it's really hard to measure SDGs and measure how a project can affect SDGs. So that's something I'm currently working on at the moment, is how we can measure the number of people that are affected by our projects and in what way they're affected and what SDGs they're hitting. So that's kind of one of the main things I'm on now. Also done a few things with Indigenous communities, particularly in Torres Strait, as part of the water team. But plenty of great opportunities within my company for humanitarian engineering. They have a great relationship with Engineers Without Borders.
Thank you so much, Danica. Thank you for condensing that for us. Riley?
Hey, everyone. My name's Riley. Thanks firstly to everyone for organising tonight, and also for the great speakers. It's been super interesting listening to all of the speakers tonight as well. I graduated last year from environmental engineering at QUT. Now working as a water environment engineer with Blytanner, a consultancy here in Brisbane. And like Danica, I sort of work in that water sensitive urban design space as well. And I've got a real interest in climate change resilience, and I guess how we can make cities more resilient to climate change, particularly considering integrated water management. So looking at water supply security and also looking at resilience to changing sea levels and flooding and rainfall patterns. I guess my first taste of humanitarian engineering, similar to most of you, I imagine, was going on an EWB design summit to Cambodia, working in rural communities along the Mekong in Cambodia. And we were specifically looking at issues around riverbank stabilization and looking at how we could manage some pretty serious erosion on these island communities. And I was kind of fortunate in addition to just doing the week with EWB in Cambodia to kind of have a few opportunities to follow that up with some further research back in Australia, which was really, really interesting. And I find myself now using a lot of the same skills that I used in Cambodia on projects here in Australia. A lot of that design thinking, that human-centered design, you know, that ability to really listen to people and learn from people is really just what makes good design, I find. So I'm definitely using a lot of those skills at the moment, particularly like Danica, working on projects with traditional owners here in Australia. You know, being able to, I guess, really embrace that and be open to new knowledge and new ways of thinking really changes the way that you approach problems. And so I find myself using a lot of those skills in my day-to-day work as well. But yeah, more than happy to answer any questions afterwards, but thanks for having me.
All right, thank you so much, Riley. So we'll get on to the real question, and I think Utkarsh sums it up really well, is all of your work is very inspiring, very exciting, How is it that we can get involved as students or as graduates as part of your initiatives? We'll start off with Jaydeep and Vishal from GHE.
Sorry. Yeah, I think there are multiple ways. One is it depends. Now, of course, there is the expeditions that we have. So in case you or your university, I'll share with you how we are engaging with some of them. So you get an example. Like with the Harvard University, it was a fully funded expedition. So the students did not have to pay for it. The professor got the grants from the university and they came on the expedition. The way we sort of structure the cost is that the cost of the solar panel and batteries is included in the cost of the expedition. So that's how the tourism thing comes in. So we have multiple ways. One, you can join as an individual on our expeditions next year. Hopefully, COVID allows travel. Or you can sort of create a group within your university and ask your university to fund it as part of an experience. Or the other thing is that, we also had with the high school in Luxembourg, their students fundraised the money for the expedition and 10 of them came. It was a small group. And then when they came, they shared their experience back with the school. And then the next year, the school decided to fund the trip. So there's multiple ways by which students have engaged. And of course, with some universities, we are also doing research projects. Whether it's, so we have some problem statements that we are happy to share. And based on your interest, so let's do this. I'll share our email ID. If you are interested, please feel free to reach out to us. We can have a conversation on what is that you can bring on board working remotely, whether it is design. I mean, if you see, we are ultimately, it's a travel company as well. So whether you are good at UX, UI, whether you are good at development, whether you're good at engineering, whatever skill set you have, happy to have that conversation and let's see where it goes. And on an organizational front, for next year, if you think you are able to convince the university to send in a group of students, happy to have that as well. So I'll just type in my email ID here and then we can take it from there.
Awesome. Thank you, Jaydeep. Srini, I know you manage, if you're still on the call, I know you manage a internship program with young engineers. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so every year about between April and August, we welcome actually engineers to join us, especially because designers and engineers, because we do keep working on newer projects. So in the past, for the last 2 years, we've been successfully having both engineers as well as designers who are completing their graduation, either in their bachelor's or master's, join us for for UI UX design, for mobile development. We've also had 1 or 2 master students from the US join us. So from Cornell and from UCLA. So they basically joined us also for shorter internships for about 2 months to do more community research and also user research, and also develop new programs for non-communicable diseases, for example, or maternal health. So we welcome also interns who are non-technical in nature, who are interested more on the community side of things, who'd like to do a landscape analysis or who probably want to help us understand more from a marketing perspective. So yeah, so we've got like 2 slots in the year. The next one will be starting in November onwards till February. And then again in April onwards till July.
Hey, awesome. Nick, do you have anything, any way students might be able to get involved or any advice on that front?
I think that, to be honest, I mean, so we're a small startup, so we don't really hire that much. I mean, we're a team of like 6 people. To be frank, I'm going to defer to Danica on this because I think like Arup, time and time again, I think like the grads who I've seen had the most impact, like have just gone and worked for private companies at Arup that have impact focus. So I'm not going to say anything in terms of like the practicalities of it, because I think the most realistic way to have impact is actually to go down Danica's path.
Well, for me, I found in my Arup interview, they weren't really interested in technical stuff. They weren't really interested in my marks. There was a question about leadership and the guy interviewing me was like, oh, we have to ask this question. What they really wanted to know about was my design summit and my student-led project. They were really interested in I think some Arup in particular, but I'm sure other companies are really interested in humanitarian engineering, consider themselves a humanitarian organisation. They're employee owned. They don't have shareholders that they have to please. So that's something they're really passionate about and comes down to their core values. So I think getting involved as in many of those kind of projects and stuff while you're in uni, and then talking about them and telling everyone you say, I'm working on this really cool project, I'm working on just building up your network. For me personally, I didn't get the Arab job through my network, but there are people in my team that did get it through their network and from going to things and talking to people. So yeah, just get involved and get as much experience as you can. Work for free if you have to, within reason. Don't do too much for free, but yeah, that's my advice.
Awesome. So what I'll do is I'll ask one last question because we are really close to 8:45 now. And I'll start with Riley, which is, what is the thing that surprised you most since you've begun working in your most current field?
Yeah, like I sort of touched on it before. I think it is how some of those transferable skills from working in, say, humanitarian or a development context translate into design thinking more broadly. You know, you can apply those skills to any sort of design problem. I've, particularly working on a project now on, some fairly significant environmental and cultural heritage considerations. I'm using those skills, being able to talk to people and listen and use some of that journey mapping and those human-centered design skills on problems here in Australia, and sort of that realization that human-centered design is actually just what makes really good design in any context.
Awesome. Danica?
I think how little technical stuff I've had to use, and how the sort of stuff that underpins human-centered design, being able to talk to people, being able to understand the actual problem and not just jumping to solutions, has helped me immensely. I cannot describe. And I think that's something that they don't really make clear at uni. They try and keep you teach you all the technical stuff, which is good, but then you get into the workplace and they're really interested in and what you find yourself using is those human-centered design skills and really thinking about the problem. Yeah.
How about yourself, JD?
So when I graduated from college, I started working with Procter and Gamble. So it was never about using any of my engineering knowledge. But I think when we started this initiative, all of that came to the fore. And I think it's about understanding a lot of the practical aspects of what you learn and how you try to implement. Because like I said, sometimes what you assume might not be the reality. And sometimes the solutions that you think work best do not work best. So I think it's about leveraging the skills, learning throughout, and understanding where do you think you're able to provide the best impact through your skills and through your knowledge and through your overall acumen.
Thank you, Jaydeep. And Srini?
Yeah, I do agree with Danica in some of the aspects. So I think as engineers or as designers, one of the most important skills that you need to have at any given point in time is using your common sense. When you're designing a solution, it can't be a solution that's just going to be super technical, super state of the art. It has to be something like Jaydeep also mentioned, it has to be something that the donkey can carry. So it needs to be something that the environment is looking for and not what you think is great for them. It'll be a total fail if you think that you're probably the best person on earth to create something really unique, but if it fails when people can't really use it. So, you can bring in all the technical knowledge you want, but I think in terms of the real world out there, there's just two things that work really well. One is how usable is what I'm building right now. And the second thing is, will people really like it? Like if people don't really like what you're building, they're not going to use it, even if it's highly effective and usable. Yeah, that's for me.
Okay, well, I think what we do is wrap it up there. We've gone well over time. Thank you so much to everyone who's come: Nick Williams, Danica Smith, Riley De Jong, Jaydeep Bansal, Vishal. And Srini and Aditi, thank you so much for the time and patience that you've given us. I really hope that this isn't the last of our conversations. We're happy for you to log off. And I'd also like to give a special mention to Pallavi Pand, Amy Tran, who've been working tirelessly in trying to bring this event together. And Amy's been doing really well in our socials. All the QUT team, Harshini, Olivia, Narelle, they've been coordinating with us for the past 3-4 weeks, trying to bring this new idea together and this experiment together. And also the other chapters, UTS, USID, UNSW, Macquarie, thank you so much for your support. And I really hope that this is a stepping stone for future collaborations and larger scale events. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll call it off here.
Right. Thanks, man.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.